So, Endwalker has been out for a few months now, and a few balance patches later, things seem to have settled down for the time being. But where does that leave our favorite tanks and healers? I asked 500 people from multiple data centers what their thoughts were on the current state of the game, and the answers were unsurprising, to say the least. You may be thinking to yourself, how did I end up asking that many people?
Oh, the corn's ready.
And I put up a party finder in game. And then I waited. I waited a really, really long time. If you're a healer player, then more than likely your opinion of a favorite tank boils down to a tank that can mitigate properly, or warriors the best to heal because they heal themselves. No, like really, out of all the healers I asked, this was 73% of healers. Due to this, we'll be covering the combination from the tank's perspective, and omitting any concepts that rely on skill, paying attention to the way that the abilities of the healers affect the tanks. At the time of making this video, there are currently 4 tank classes and 4 healer classes, which makes for a total of 16 different unique combinations. We'll be covering the strengths and weaknesses of each one. This video is not intended to be used as a guide for what is good or bad, but instead educate people who are unfamiliar or inexperienced with tanking or healing in this game about specific interactions in the toolkits of the jobs involved. At the end of the day, an experienced healer can make up for an inexperienced tank, and vice versa regardless of job. Alright, so let's just get this one out of the way up front. Dark Knight has fallen behind the pack in terms of self-healing. With the new Endwalker changes where each tank has some form of regen baked into their spammable low cooldown mitigation, Dark Knight misses out on this bandwagon of self-sustain in our tanks. But due to their unique invuln, they often find themselves in need of large amounts of burst healing, making pure healers more favored at a base level. But what do healers have to say about Dark Knight? Yeah, that's not really a huge surprise. Living Dead can be a barrier for some people, so Dark Knight sinks to the bottom in popularity for healers. With this in mind, let's talk about what healers do mesh well enough with Dark Knight. Well, at least before those Living Dead changes end up coming through. Number 4. Dark Knight and Sage. If you're either role in this combination, you know why this isn't a good feeling when you match up together in a roulette. Both ends want to place shields on the tank to be broken to fuel their own damaging abilities, but due to the nature of how shielding in this game works, it can be really inconsistent in who ends up getting their procs or not. The shield which breaks first will be the shield that was added last, meaning that if the Dark Knight shields themselves before the Sage shields them, then more often than not, the Dark Knight will never get their TBN proc. While this can be written off as a minor inconvenience at first, once you've actually played this combination, you'll quickly see the Dark Knight running out of their damage buffs as they need to prioritize mitigation or damage, as well as the Sage not outputting as much damage and healing as it normally can with other tanks due to the lack of incoming Addersting procs. Number 3. Dark Knight and Scholar. It should come at no surprise that shield healers don't want to be in a party with a Dark Knight due to the amount of abilities needed to get the tank from 1 to 100 during their Living Dead invuln window. Unlike Gunbreaker's Super Bolide, Dark Knight's invuln doesn't make them immune to further damage after it's triggered, making it difficult for a class that focuses on stopping damage from coming in the first place to keep the Dark Knight from dying to their own ability. Thanks to the Scholar's long cooldown burst healing options, they have an easier time dealing with this downside than Sage players do, and the consistent low potency heals of the Scholar's Fairy help to reduce the need for an invuln to be popped by the Dark Knight in the first place. Number 2. Dark Knight and Astrologian. Falling into second place here simply for being the other pure or regen healer out of the 4 healers is enough for Astro to earn this spot. Dark Knight wants to take damage when they use their Blackest Night ability to break their self-applied shield. This allows them to use one of their mana costing abilities for free to extend their self-damage buff. Not having to overlap shields with their healer is a huge plus, so Astro comes out on top of shield healers. Plus, Dark Knights typically want to use their Salted Earth ability during pulls and keep the pack of mobs in one spot. This allows the Astrologian's earthly star to completely charge up without needing to worry about where the tank is going to stop their pull or not. Once that red circle goes down, that tells the Astrologian that it's safe to put down their own circle. Number 1. Dark Knight and White Mage. There's just no beating this combination for Dark Knight simply because of the way the Dark Knight invuln works. Having to be healed all the way back to full health after dying with Living Dead can be a tall order for other healers compared to the single button press of Benediction from a White Mage. Pair this with the stuns that come from the White Mage's Holy Spam, buying time for the Dark Knight to use their MP for their damaging abilities rather than their personal shield, and you've got a recipe for success. This list of combinations is very easily seen being reflected in the data that the Dark Knight players I asked gave to me, with an overwhelming amount of preference for pure healers. Now let's go from one end of a lack of self-healing on the spectrum of tanks to the complete opposite. The golden child of dungeon tanking as soon as you hit level 56 and obtain the holy grail of self-sustain, raw intuition. Due to its low cooldown, mitigation, and its ridiculous amounts of self-healing during wall-to-wall pulls in dungeons, Warrior has quickly risen to the top of the list for healers who like to deal damage. Though of course, raw intuition bloodwetting is only insanely strong in dungeon settings where there are multiple enemies to heal off of. This enormous amount of self-healing has been extremely divisive in the healer community. Some feeling like their role has become redundant, and others enjoying that their tank doesn't require as much attention, allowing them to play green DPS. Which seems to be the majority of you based on the data that you provided. Every single healer job showed a preference for Warrior in their current state. With this in mind, let's look at some of the more niche scenarios that makes one healer come out on top of another. Number 4. Warrior and White Mage. The fact that this pairing is last in the Warriors list is a bit comedic to me considering that they are both ARR classes, but as time went on, these two just started to go their separate ways. White Mage is the definitive healer of Final Fantasy, and since Warrior barely needs a healer, White Mage players can feel kind of useless. Outside of spamming Glare and Holy, their main gimmick is spending their lilies on healing to charge up a strong burst of damage, and without any healing to do most of the time, it feels like you have to decide whether to use them to overheal and get your blood lily, or just not use them at all. Number 3. Warrior and Astrologian. At a base level, the amount of self-healing that Warrior does conflicts with what regen healers want to do, which is deal the damage after it's been done, and it's not a great feeling when you see the tank is always topped off without any intervention from you. To offset this negative trait, Astrologian can spend its time during pulls paying more attention to their cards and seals than they usually get to. They get to spend their time helping DPS output as much damage as they can with the appropriate cards, as well as making the most out of the buffs coming out of their Astrodyne. Number 2. Warrior and Scholar. Shield healers with tanks that can heal themselves in large amounts are always a good pairing. Scholar's burst heal resources are either locked behind long cooldowns or need to be managed in charges similar to Sage. While EOS can help with some of the in-between healing, unless the Scholar dumps all of its long cooldowns into healing on the tank, it can be harder to top them off before a mechanic calls for full health. Warrior's self-healing synergizes perfectly with Scholar's weaknesses, allowing for the best of both classes to shine through here. Number 1. Warrior and Sage. This combination is just incredible. The Warrior's self-shield is very small and doesn't hit the same problem that it had when it was paired with Dark Knight, allowing it to get all of his shield breaks during pulls without stepping on the toes of the Warrior. Thanks to Warrior's high self-sustain, Warrior ends up being a good tank to have in your party if you're still learning how to make the most out of your kit as a Sage. And it can be pretty complicated at higher levels, making Warrior the perfect lab rat to find out what abilities do without endangering the party. Due to this more healer-friendly player aspect, Sage comes out on top over Scholar, not specifically for anything the Sage ability can do, but more so for what Sage players can do to rely on a Warrior. But what do Warrior players think about healers? Yeah, this was a really common response. But after wringing a preference out, this is what people had to say. Sage being on par with White Mage for Warrior players' preference. But when asked why they preferred White Mage, the answer was always just something along the lines of, Holy lets me deal more damage. Now, let's jump from one ARR tank to a different ARR tank. The original defensive tank, the living shield of the party, the Paladin excels in defensives, boasting the most raid-wide mitigation out of the tanks, going so far as to be able to tank all of the damage of another player with their cover ability. Being able to heal itself through the use of Clemency, as well as having a regen on their low cooldown spammable mitigation Holy Sheltron, they're a jack of all trades tank. Due to this flexibility, there aren't really any conflicting issues between the combination of Paladin and a healer, but there are some that are slightly still preferred over others. When it comes to how the healer community views Paladins though, it seems to be one of those cases of not complaining, but not celebrating either, as it consistently clocks in at second preference for healers. With that in mind, let's take a look at what combinations help it earn that place. Number 4. Paladin and White Mage. The classic combination since all the way back in ARR, the Stalwart Shield and the Benevolent Staff, Hoary Boulder and Coltonet, the tried and true mitigation tank and pure healer. There's not really a lot to say about this one. Paladin uses all of its mitigation, and what little damage they do end up sustaining, the White Mage's regens can easily top them off. Though, there is one dyssynergy that puts this combination this far down in the listings. Holy. Without coordination between the Paladin and the White Mage, the Holy stun durations will eat the first charge of the Paladin's Holy Sheltron, effectively wasting a slot of mitigation. This is never a good feeling for the Paladin, and since the lack of mitigation comes along with this, the White Mage ends up suffering in some capacity as well. Number 3. Paladin and Sage. This combination is beneficial to both parties without any drawbacks. The Paladin wants to spend its mana to deal damage, and the Sage wants the Paladin to take damage to break their shields for Addersting stacks. The regen added to Holy Sheltron at higher levels of Paladin that came along with Endwalker made shield healers much more desirable, and since Sage wants a tank that can mostly take care of itself, the Sage is allowed to focus on outputting as much damage as possible without stepping on any toes or endangering the party. Number 2. Paladin and Astrologian. The Paladin's large amounts of mitigation allows the regens from the Astrologian to do a majority of the heavy lifting without needing as much attention, allowing the Astrologian to execute their cards in the most efficient manner possible without the tank suffering from a lack of healing. Another strong point of this combination is the adaptability of both classes. Paladin's Divine Veil grants a small party-wide shield in the same way that Astrologian's Neutral Sect ability allows both regens and shields to be placed at the same time. So no matter what is needed in any type of content, this combination of a healer and tank can adapt to it. Number 1. Paladin and Scholar. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why would Scholar be preferred over Sage here? Well, it's because of the fairy. Paladins want to be spending their mana to deal damage in pulls just like a Dark Knight, but unlike the Dark Knight, the Paladin's largest self-heal also costs mana, forcing the Paladin to have to choose between the two in the moment. Ideally, a Paladin would never need to cast Clemency, but in the instances that they do, they benefit more from having a shield healer. To put it simply, the Scholar's Fairy outputting consistent, automatic, low-potency heals is more reliable than the healing done from the Sage's Guardian. In this combination of a Scholar and a Paladin, both sides get to do what they do best, making it the ideal combination for the Paladin. But what are the Paladin players' preference? Well, this doesn't really come as a surprise. Scholar and Sage being about equal and White Mage being very dominant here just goes to show that Paladin players just prefer something that's a bit more reliable. With this in mind, let's take a look at the other mitigation tank that seems to do well enough on its own. Gunbreaker. The blue DPS that can take a tank buster or two to the face. The tank that makes healers panic when their health suddenly drops from 100 to 1 and disgruntles any healer that would rather be a green DPS than a healer. While boasting some strong self-mitigation and a high-potency self-heal attached to their low cooldown damage reduction, they are a strong option for the DPS player at heart. But what do healers have to say about the Gunbreaker? Clocking in consistently in third place for every healer except for White Mage, Gunbreaker seems to be preferred over Dark Knight, which doesn't really come as a surprise. With this in mind, let's take a look at their tier list. Number 4. Gunbreaker and White Mage. 2 words. Benediction, Super Bolide. This is one of, if not the worst feeling out of every possible combination of tanks and healers. Without coordination, you can say goodbye to a White Mage's emergency undo button, and all of that enormous healing is just flushed down the drain a moment later by the Gunbreaker invuln. The aftermath of this is a devastating moment filled with a tenuous quiet and disbelief that the meme came true right in front of your eyes, followed by the fervent spamming of the rest of the White Mage's kit to try and undo the mistiming of Benediction. I pray, and I am not a religious wool, that this never happens to you in a party. Number 3. Gunbreaker and Sage. Thanks to the Gunbreaker's delayed self-heal on Heart of Corundum, they have a baked-in safety net for Sages to do their maximum DPS while barely having to spend their Adderskull stacks. Combine this trait with the high self-mitigations that Gunbreaker boasts in combination with the mitigation that Sage can give to another player in the form of Tarachol, and tank busters fly by without so much as a scratch on the tank. That is if the boss can crack through the Brutal Shell and Eucrasian Diagnosis shield combo in the first place. Number 2. Gunbreaker and Scholar. The Scholar and Gunbreaker combination has its ups and downs, but still does better than Sage when it comes to the two shield healers due to its ability to do large amounts of burst pure healing when it comes down to it. A combination of recitation emergency tactics ad loquium can restore a low health Gunbreaker in an instant compared to the hoops that a Sage would need to go through to achieve the same. Another great synergy between these two is the delayed heal offered by Gunbreaker's Heart of Corundum and Scholar's Excog, making for an enormous delayed heal when the Gunbreaker drops to 50% HP, creating a very reliable safety net for dungeons and roulettes or whatever content you might be going into. Number 1. Gunbreaker and Astrologian. The best of the Gunbreaker's healer pairings for 2 reasons. Firstly, Gunbreakers do their best with the pure healer due to how their invuln works. Dropping themselves down to 1 HP from whatever their current HP is can be a bit daunting for shield healers. Meanwhile, Astrologian's segmented pure healing and regens can get the job done rather easily during that 10-second window. Another great reason for this pairing is the high potencies of Gunbreaker's single target abilities. More often than not, as an Astrologian, you'll end up with 2 ranged DPS in a dungeon, and you'll either have to bite the bullet and give one of those DPS a melee card, or pray for a reroll in your favor. But when you have a Gunbreaker for a tank, you can give them the melees without any potential DPS loss. But what do Gunbreakers have to think about the healers in this situation? Well, this was actually the most surprising. It seems that Gunbreakers prefer the safety net of a White Mage, as a majority of them never really considered Benediction and Super Bolide being a problem. On the upper echelon of Gunbreakers, or what people consider themselves the upper echelon of Gunbreakers, if you ever need to Super Bolide in the first place, then you're not using your kit correctly. Therefore, White Mage's large burst healing doesn't really seem to be an issue. So all in all, what can we take away from this information? Well, it would seem that no one is arguing the fact that most healers prefer Warrior for one reason or another, but the minority that dislike their enormous amounts of self-healing are really vocal about it. Meanwhile, on the tank side of things, most tank players prefer a White Mage, either for the security that Benediction brings or just for the holy spam for stuns. I hope that this video helps you feel informed about what to expect when you queue up for your dungeons or roulettes as one of these 2 roles, and helps you feel a bit more educated on what your partner can do to help you succeed. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who contributed data for this video. It took forever to make, like 2 months, so I hope you enjoyed it. Do you agree with my tier lists? Leave a comment about it and subscribe if you see yourself in the credits. If you're already subscribed, then follow the links in the description to support me further if you want to. There's a Patreon down there and a Twitter. Until next time, take care.
So why did the video take so long?